Welcome to another episode of The Council. My guest today is a gentleman who bumped into me at Deepak Karmakar's book launch, written by Digvijay Deo. So shout out to Digvijay. James, you actually bumped into me because I was pimping out my visiting cards and you overheard a conversation and came up and introduced yourself. Thanks for coming on the show, James Cronin. Can you, for the purpose of our listeners and our viewers, can you give us a brief window into your professional career thus far?
Yeah, of course. So I've always been kind of passionate about sport, particularly football. And kind of growing up, I always wanted to find a way to work in the sports world, but kind of didn't get there immediately. Right. So at a university, I worked as a founder of a startup media company. It's kind of like an agency, communications business, films, videos, photography, that kind of thing. And that was 2 or 3 years. So lots of kind of creative experience and the media side of it. Then moved to a publishing company, which has offices both in Birmingham and here in Mumbai. So that was my kind of first connection to India. From there, along the side, I've kind of run events businesses in my home city, trying to engage people in kind of civic pride and culture, and always done kind of football journalism as well on the side, writing for various online magazines and publications. And then basically the chance came along upon coming to India and kind of moving here permanently. I was fascinated by the football scene here, saw it as a kind of an untold story really, and began to take the journalism side of things more seriously. So today I'm working as a freelance football journalist based here in India, kind of running around the country, meeting people, uncovering stories and hopefully sharing the wider world, the story of Indian football and some of the characters within it. So yeah, hopefully a executive summary.
Great. No, and so that's the reason why we brought you on the show. As I mentioned to you earlier, one of the reasons we have these conversations with people within the sports fraternity in India is to dispel the myths that we have outside the sports fraternity of India, right? There are two kinds of people that look in from out, which is one group of people that think that, oh, sports is just a time pass, nobody's really serious here. Well, that's not true. And the other side think, oh, sports is great, glamorous, glitzy industry, everything is so rosy, but that's also not true either. So that's the purpose of the council. So I want to get things started off in our conversation here, James, by asking a question we ask all our guests. James Cronin, do you think India is a nation of sport?
I think undoubtedly it's a nation of sport.
Right.
I think based on when you drive around Mumbai or you go anywhere around the country, it's rare that you'd go 10 or 15 minutes without seeing some evidence of sport in the landscape, whether it's, you know, street or beach cricket or football, whether it's stadia, whether it's replica jerseys. I've kind of been surprised about how much sport I see on a daily basis.
Right.
I think cricket, obviously kind of India world famous for its cricket, international leader in the sport arguably, and I guess from the outside looking in, my expectation was just it's only cricket. And that is the sole sport India loves. Right. But since I've lived here and spent time here and scratched beneath the surface, I've seen people fanatical about football, badminton, sports I'd never even heard of like kabaddi, and millions almost of sports that are completely under the radar as far as the international perception of India goes. Right. But I've had countless conversations with people completely devoted and seriously passionate and excited about those sports. So yeah, I'd say that coupled with the kind of the culture here of sort of hero worship and celebrity, when you think things like Bollywood and cricket, sport kind of fits alongside that. It creates role models for people, and I think looking at the way sports stars are perceived in India, I'd say yeah, it's up there with the music and the cinema as a real key part of kind of my experience anyway of Indian culture so far.
Right. I mean, and some can argue, as a matter of fact, we were just having this conversation before this interview, before this conversation, is that it can be argued that our cricketing stars, our biggest cricketing stars, their sports stars, are actually bigger than some of our biggest Bollywood stars. It's interesting that you mentioned the word perception, right? Because before you came to India, you had a perception of what the Indian sporting scenario would look like, right? But once you land here, you realize it's a completely different ball game. There is some parts of it that is accurate and most of it that isn't. What are the two things that stood out for you? Now, they need not be good things or bad things. They're just things that stood out for you when you came here that kind of went against your perceptions of what Indian sport would look like.
Yeah, sure. So for me specifically as a football fan, I came here expecting to see almost no evidence of football. I expected to see cricket everywhere as you do, you know, Virat Kohli on every billboard, etc.
Right.
But the thing that surprised me as a real positive was the massive passion for football here, particularly, you know, La Liga, the English Premier League, the Italian League, the Bundesliga. I think I've seen more replica football jerseys here in India than I have in any other city or town in the world. There's more Man United jerseys here than there are in Manchester. I'd say that with full confidence. Right. So that was kind of a complete happy surprise for me to see this, you know, untold story of huge passion for the game. So definitely there's a kind of a fan culture here that I didn't know existed, that's clearly been fostered and developed somehow, whether through, you know, good marketing from the Western clubs, etc. But there's a massive passion and a huge detailed knowledge of the game here. I've spoken to people from Mumbai that know far more about the Manchester United squad than Mancunians would, who speak passionately about every manager's interview, every team lineup, every tactical change, to the point where I wonder how that kind of passion has been brought to light, really.
Right.
So that was definitely a real positive and a surprise for me. Right. I think then the way that sport happens at a very grassroots level, we talked about this again previously, the kind of unsung hero culture.
Right.
I think in the UK, my experience of sport was often very organised, very formal. Yes, you'd have people playing in the park, etc., but there are thousands of opportunities for people to play, you know, school games, leagues, tournaments, grassroots, whatever it might be in any sport. Right. Here, I think, when I first looked at it, I didn't see a lot of those opportunities, particularly in football. But what I've been kind of really impressed by is, despite kind of financial or family hurdles or societal kind of challenges put in the way, people still find a way to play sport everywhere all the time. Right. So that real kind of grassroots passion for the amateur side of the game, again, I didn't expect to see it. I thought India would be preoccupied with so many other things, but it seems sport is still here, very visible. Right. So those unsung heroes, people around the country that are coaching junior teams, that are spending their own time and money to help young players get their first chance, that are bringing groups of amateurs and adults together to play. Again, I didn't expect to see that, and it's great to see such a kind of undercurrent of sport passion running through the veins almost.
It's interesting you mentioned the fact that you end up meeting a lot of Indian fans who know more about Western clubs than, you know, some fans of Western clubs in the Western world itself. So I'll pick up on that aspect a little later, because I have a question I want to ask you there. Before we do that though, you're somebody who, prior to this conversation, you told me that you've been following the EPL for pretty much all your life, ever since you can remember, which is probably 20-25 years. So you've seen the EPL from its early days to now. If I could ask you, it's a two-part question. The first part is, what is the one thing that Indian football, and whether it's the I-League or the ISL, what is it that we're getting right in terms of this is the right way to do things, because the EPL clubs or Western clubs did this right, they grew to where they are. So what's the one thing we are doing right? And maybe what's one thing that we could do better? If you could kind of give us one example of each.
Yeah, sure. I think in terms of what's going right, I kind of separate the ISL from Indian football. Right. Similarly, I'd separate the EPL from English football. I think the top 1%, I see it as the global stars in the EPL, or the highest paid kind of best players in India, is actually only scratching the surface of really what football is. So what I've seen to be going really right here is there is a real genuine passion for football at the amateur and grassroots level, kind of untouched by corporations and by corruption and by kind of endorsement, which a lot of people in the UK, myself included, feel has kind of ruined English football to an extent. So I think one thing that I'm really kind of passionate about, having found here, is that there is this genuine passion for football, particularly in the I-League and some of the more amateur leagues, the MDFA. People don't go because the adverts told them to. People don't go because it's a product that they want to buy. People go because they genuinely care about the game. It's a community thing for them. So I think if Indian football can harness that and use that more, and not just try and mimic a business model that works elsewhere, I think there's a real kind of treasure trove of great stuff there that could be exaggerated and emphasised more. Right. From an ISL perspective, the one thing that I've noticed happening really well is the visibility, the kind of marketing, the outreach. For me this year anyway, it's been impossible to ignore the ISL. But when I speak to people about Indian football over the last 10 or 15 years, often they say it's invisible unless you dig around and find it. But I think this year I've seen far more television coverage, far more, whether it's social media, advertising, etc. It's definitely becoming more of a household and family tradition to watch the football and actually care about those teams. So I think definitely a positive, the way it's marketed and kind of the visibility of it.
Right.
And that just needs to continue to grow. But I think that's definitely something that I was surprised by for such a young league, for what is not a favoured sport in India. It's definitely getting there in terms of its kind of its place in society increasing.
Right. So okay. So I want to address a couple of your points with terms of visibility of ISL. But if you can kind of help me with understanding. So you again coming back to the earlier question, which is you've seen the EPL evolve over the years. You've seen English football evolve over the years. What are some of the things that Indian football or the ISL are doing currently that they could do better?
I think the main thing for me feels like...
Sorry for interrupting, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing it wrong. It's just that, okay, they're doing something, could they do it in a slightly different way to make it better? That's what I was getting.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think in terms of the way the whole thing is set up, kind of from the vision, the top line, I think still the fact that there's this confusion over what the National League of India is.
Right.
So the ISL obviously has come onto the scene 5 years ago and has really made ground. But what has been lost there potentially is the history of a 100-year-old competition that's evolved in the shape of the I-League. And kind of it feels like it's a fork in the road, and Indian football maybe is trying to take two paths at the moment, right, and will eventually try and combine them again, or will eventually choose one. I think the advantage that the English League has, the EPL, is that it is one clear pathway, one clear system, one kind of cohesive group of leagues and fans and clubs, which makes the whole thing very easy to understand and easy to kind of grow and progress. So I think if the ISL is making strides to become the dominant league, I think the challenge there is get everyone on that boat, get everyone kind of in the same direction, singing off the same hymn sheet.
Got it.
So that kind of organisational, infrastructure side of it. Secondly, I think the EPL has continued to attract some of the best international talent. And if you look at the product of the football, as in the actual 22 players on a field, the quality of the touches, the goals, the possession, the kind of visible product, the EPL does that better than anyone. So if you look at India, yes, we've seen kind of marquee players here over the last 4 years, whether it's Forlan, Pires, Ljungberg, Anelka, we've had big names. The question is, can they sustain that and continue to bring international talent alongside developing homegrown, so that in 5 or 10 years, the quality of the football we see on the screen becomes on a par or getting a lot closer to the Premier League, Serie A, Bundesliga.
Got it.
So yeah, continuing to attract talent, improving the quality of the football itself.
Right.
Definitely something that...
It's interesting you mentioned that, because that takes me on directly to my next question, which was going to be to you is, there is, I would say, I can safely say 80% of the football fans in India are actually EPL fans or Western football fans first, whether it's EPL, whether it's La Liga, Serie A, so on and so forth. So on two levels, I feel that there is a gap between what they expect the product that we have created, whether it's ISL or I-League. There's a huge gap between what we expect the product to be and what it is currently. And I don't think that's necessarily only a fault with fans, right? I also feel like the ISL in its current format, I felt that we went too high too fast, and that's my personal opinion. So what I'm trying to get at is that what we're doing right now is great, but the expectation is that we should probably be like the EPL. So you have a lot of fans, or even that, for that matter, even team owners who happen to be fans, complain that this is not working, that's not working. And the reason they're saying it's not working is not because in and by itself it's not working, but it's not working as compared to Manchester United or Real Madrid. Since, as somebody who has seen the EPL grow over 2 decades, or seen Western football grow over 2 decades, could you help provide some perspective to fans who feel a little disillusioned that Indian football's product or its quality is not as great as the Western world? I for one feel that you just got to be patient. But that for me sometimes is silly to say, because that's obvious. You have to be patient. But as somebody who's seen it grow in a Western setup, like you said, everybody's on the same path. What is something you can tell an Indian fan or an Indian team owner that, hey guys, this is what you got to look at when you judge or you compare Indian football to Western football?
Sure. I think one of the main things I draw as a distinction is between football as a product, as a quality thing we see on the screen, versus football fandom as an experience, as a culture. So I think Indian fans watching the EPL, the culture and the community element has grown. There are fan clubs, people are really passionate about the minor details, but really it's grown as, I like this product, I'm going to start to invest my time and effort in the players, the goals, the tricks, the flicks, the highlights, and the culture grows from there. But in English football, the years before the EPL was really where it was born, really where fans became invested in the club, the communities were built around it. And you have a fraction of fans that support Arsenal, Man United, Chelsea, Man City, but the majority of football fans in England support teams in first, second, third, fourth divisions, where I would argue the quality of the product is better in the ISL.
Right.
So actually you've got to ask yourself, why do those fans still turn up week in, week out? They enjoy the experience, they go with their families, their friends, their local communities. So I think my challenge to Indian fans or owners would be, what do you want out of your football experience? If you want tricks, flicks, highlights, great goals, I think the ISL will get there. But if you want that, you're already an EPL fan. That's where you get your fix almost. If you want to really enjoy being a fan of the ISL or an I-League team or an Indian football team, it's about going to the matches. It's about the ritual and the routine, the rites of passage, the traditions you build. I think that is what is kind of missing right now. Pockets of the fans have it. You see very small groups in the stadiums that cheer and scream and shout. If you go to Goa or Kerala, you see that infectiously happening. And I think when people criticise the product of the ISL, they're kind of totally missing the point. Right. Football, for me, I'm a West Bromwich Albion fan. I had my time as a Manchester United fan as a youngster, but then I couldn't afford the tickets. It was hundreds of miles from where I lived, and I liked them because David Beckham was great and they won trophies. The minute I started going to watch my local club with fans from my local area, cheaper tickets, having a beer and a pie, getting involved in the whole atmosphere and the routine and the ritual, I fell madly in love with that and became a West Bromwich Albion fan overnight, and my Manchester United days were behind me. And I think having had that epiphany myself, I'd encourage Indian fans to keep their EPL passion, enjoy watching the global stars on the TV, etc. But if you really want to become an Indian football fan and enjoy it, go to the stadiums, enjoy the whole ritual and the routine, because that's really where you'll get your kind of long-term enjoyment from the game, regardless of results, players and goals. It's more about kind of blindly following it as a religion more than kind of just having it as another product or another pastime. Right. So I guess your question was kind of what can the ISL learn? It would be trying to foster the grassroots and community level of the club, not just worrying about the TV and the marketing, but doing it at a real kind of grassroots personal level. And for the fans, it's enjoy it and get out there and do it for yourselves. Don't just rely on the television and Instagram to give you your experience of football. Go to the games, talk to other fans, scream and shout. That's kind of the emotional connection that I feel British football fans really have with the game. Whether they're a Man United fan or an Aldershot Town or a Tranmere Rovers supporter, it's that personal, heartfelt connection with the club. And whether you're losing every week or winning every week, it kind of doesn't matter after a while.
No, and I want to pick up on something you said there, which is really interesting, and thank you for that perspective, because it's a very deep perspective. It's a very important perspective. But something I want to pick up on what you said. So you mentioned places like Goa and Kerala, and I also know, because we've had conversations before this, that you've traveled to a couple of places to see what's happening. I 100% agree with you that if teams have to grow, they need to build that community/grassroots program. One good thing with the ISL is that they mandate every club has to spend X amount of money on grassroots programming. But personally, I don't see grassroots as only developing football. I also see it as developing communities. You've traveled across the country now over the past 6 or 8 months and seen a lot of these communities up front. You've spoken to a whole bunch of people. Are there any interesting stories of people that, I would say just maybe 1 or 2 interesting stories of people that stand out from the rest, saying, okay, this is something that not only did I expect, but this has just gone far beyond my belief, as a matter of fact?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the main highlights for me was a trip to Kolkata. I'd heard so much about the East Bengal Mohun Bagan rivalry. I read up on the history. It's one of the few kind of games or factors of Indian football that really makes the media and clearly has a history. And when I went there, I expected, Derby Day to be as I've seen Derby Day in the UK. You know, a good singing contingent of fans, a bit of a buzz around the stadium, a good, well-contested game and a load of media hanging around kind of thing. But getting to Kolkata that morning, I've never seen anything like it. I met with East Bengal fans. They were kind enough to invite me to join them for the day. So these were the ultras, so the kind of the hardcore support. And we arrived in the morning, we got a taxi from the airport directly to where we were meeting these guys who were finishing their kind of 50-foot wide TIFO banner, this giant flag. They'd spent weeks preparing it, you know, 15, 20 fans had worked through the night with paper mache and paint to build this, you know, giant thing. We then went to the Kolkata stadium, smuggled it in under my pretense as a BBC journalist in inverted commas. We smuggled this TIFO in. We spent the whole day with these guys, kind of slowly but surely, hour by hour, building up to the game. And I could see that it meant so much more to them than I've ever seen a derby game mean. It wasn't just, will my team win and will we get the points? It was about kind of religion, it was about migration and history of culture, class. And I'd never expected to see such incredible footballing passion in a nation that, as far as I was concerned, loved cricket and nothing else. Right. So some of the characters I met that day who kind of lived and died by that result, to see them, it was an epic 3-2 game, there was red cards, there was drama. And I kind of felt that day that I'd been indoctrinated as an East Bengal fan, and I now check their score as the results every single week. So I think I'd never had that injection of passion and real epiphany of, wow, this is kind of something completely out of this world I've ever seen in, you know, any football experience I've ever had. Right. So those people definitely kind of convinced me that Indian football is a big deal, and it is there at that kind of real grassroots passionate level. So the challenge is, how do you kind of repeat and create that same passion around the nation? But right. Those guys were ridiculously inspiring, and I think gave me a real window into 100 years of history in Indian football, not just 5 years of ISL.
Right. No, I completely get where you come from when you say indoctrination of becoming a fan, because they and in a good way, the East Bengal Mohun Bagan derby is like a black hole. It just sucks you in, and in a good way. Like, it just, the atmosphere is incredible. As a matter of fact, I'm not a huge fan of this phrase, but occasionally it gets thrown out. It's like, you don't feel like you're in India. It almost, you know, that phrase you get. And when you compare the derby in Kolkata with anything else, any other sports experience across the country, other than when maybe probably India play Pakistan in a cricket match, but that's obvious, right? Because that's nationalistic fervor. You have the Indians gather together. It's like, in a way, we gather together to beat Pakistan. But this is this local derby. You know, it's in one city, not even so much the state. I kind of want to bring our conversation to a wrap here, James, by asking you a question which is a little more broad-based and it's a little more generic, which is, we've spoken about football thus far, and I understand that that's where your passion and your drive and your career thus far has taken you. But as a sporting culture, as a country that's like you said, you believe you're a nation of sport. I personally don't think we're there yet. I think there's a lot to be done. But as somebody who has grown up in the West and somebody who has seen the Western sporting culture, not footballing culture, what are two things that you think India has to evolve in India to become a nation of sport? What are two things that need to evolve as a culture in terms of a sporting culture?
Interesting. Culturally, I think one of the major things has been kind of, you'll get sports fans and sports players that seem often to operate kind of in silos around the nation or around a city. So there are a few thousand football fans of Mumbai City that all work together, or there's a passion for badminton or kabaddi in a certain place. But often, you know, as you mentioned earlier, I think these things are looked at as pastimes, and maybe families don't support their sons or daughters to take the sport up. Going to watch the sport is seen as just one of a million things you can do as a hobby, rather than a kind of rite of passage and a necessity. And I think culturally it's about educating kind of families, communities, schools, that sport is actually a kind of window into life. You can learn a hell of a lot from playing sport. There are incredible amounts of kind of educational skills that can be built, communities that can be constructed entirely based on a passion for sport. It happens here in cricket, and that seemed to be kind of the one and only that's done it in India. Right. So I guess it would be a kind of whether it's an initiative of the government, of the sports ministry, whatever, whether it's an initiative of clubs and brands to take on this responsibility. But let's get sport into the homes and the families and the communities far more than it is now. It shouldn't just be, an option, this sport happens in this city. I'd really like to see it be kind of adopted more widely as an institution, almost as a religion in India, rather than just a nice to have or a luxury.
Right.
And that kind of focus on getting a job, getting your career, getting your family set that all Indian families seem to kind of gravitate towards. I'd like to see sport become a part of that more. So whether it's down to kind of cultural change generationally, the education of families and parents to allow more of the younger generation to kind of fall in love with sport in that way. But from growing up in Britain and having that as kind of a staple part of every day or every week, India's not far off that, but it just needs that kind of 1 or 2 generations down to really take it up as a passion rather than a kind of nice to have or as an accessory to kind of their routines or their livelihoods.
One of the interesting anecdotes I wanted to tell you is something that I shared with you just before this conversation. Is I was one day just scrolling through Instagram, and it's interesting that I bumped into you, I think, on a particular day, and about 4 or 5 days later, I'm scrolling through Instagram and I see your photograph and I click on it and I was like, that's James. I just bumped into him and I was like, who's that with him? I said, that's John Abraham and John's wife. So one is, I wanted to get your thought on this, right? In the Western world, whether it's the US and the basketball, NFL and the MLB, and in the UK it's football and cricket. Celebrities, like everyday celebrities, right? Your entertainment celebrities, to be specific, are actually sports fans. So they will invest their time and money in sport. There is a huge debate going on in India as to whether the celebrity culture needs to be part of the growth of sport in India. I, for one, believe anything that helps sport grow in India helps. Whether that means getting a celebrity on board, whether that means trying to tie up with another sport that's more popular, football tying up with cricket. I think as long as it helps the sport grow, it works. As somebody who clearly has spent time with John and you've spent time with other team owners as well, what are your thoughts on the celebrity culture, using celebrity culture, entertainment celebrity culture to grow sport in India?
I think I'd agree with you in the sense that if it allows more fans to access and understand the sport, if it's used as a kind of window into it or as a gateway in, I see no harm in it happening. I think particularly with the case of football, it's clear that kind of cricket grabs the eyeballs and the passion of people far more. Equally, it's clear that Bollywood and the cinema industry does the same. So if they can kind of leverage and work with that influence that those industries have in order to get football higher up the list of priorities and the most watched clips, etc., I don't see any harm in it. I think the only kind of distinction I would draw is celebrities for the sake of it versus celebrities who actually have a passion and a drive and can speak to why they love or care about that sport. Right. I think if you're a sports fan or you were on the fence, you might see through a kind of shameless celebrity endorsement as just they're sticking his or her face on this. But then, having met John in particular, he didn't want to talk about Bollywood at all. He didn't want to talk about the cinema, however much I pressed him. All he wanted to talk about was the next generation of Indian footballers, the academy system, the infrastructure. And he's clearly someone that is a massive fan before he is anything else. Right. He spoke of his kind of ambition to play for India as a youngster before ever becoming or wanting to become an actor or a model or anything like that. Right. So I think if there are these celebrities that clearly hold such a high important status in culture here, that also have that passion for the game, whatever sport that might be, those are the ambassadors that they should really be focusing on. Particularly in John's case, I was blown away by how passionately he spoke, how intricately he cared about kind of the minute detail of the club and raising the reputation of the northeast of India as a result of using football. So I think if the celebrities see their role as more than just a brand ambassador, but actually someone that rolls their sleeves up and gets involved, I think that will do no end of good. And I guess I'd just warn against the kind of, sticking a face on a billboard for the sake of it, although it will do some good for eyeballs and maybe Instagram followers, etc. If you really want to grow and develop, inspiring new fans to follow North East United or FC Goa, I think there's got to be that slightly deeper layer of input from the celebrities. In the same way in the UK, you see celebrities interviewed all the time saying, I'm an Aston Villa fan, or I'm a Manchester United fan, and they regale stories of their childhood love for the club, etc. That's the gold dust that I think will really help celebrity and football to kind of fit together.
I agree, and I think for me it's all summed up in one sentence, which is you put your money where the mouth is. Your mouth is, right? Which is people like John with this Ranbir, Abhishek. There are people who've actually invested time and money into the club. That is what essentially works, as opposed to, like you said, endorsements. Endorsements don't work because you don't have a history with the club. You don't. I follow the NBA very closely, so you hear a handful of Hollywood celebrities who talk about their love for the Lakers. And those guys actually make sense because they actually grew up with the Lakers, right? Whether it's Denzel Washington, whether it's Jack Nicholson, whether it's to that matter Leonardo DiCaprio, massive stars in their own right, but they grew up in a way, they saw the Lakers, they grew up with the Lakers. So similarly, like you said, with celebrities in the UK, entertainment celebrities in the UK who grew up with their clubs, that for me makes far more sense as opposed to just say putting a celebrity or as an endorsement. James, thank you so much. I think it's always interesting to get an outside perspective of somebody who has grown up within a sporting culture and comes to India. I truly believe that there are things that we can learn from each other, and which is why we have the council on a regular basis. I hope this is not the last time we see you here. I hope you keep coming. All the best with your future ventures, and see you soon.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Thanks, James.
Thanks for having me. Cheers.